The stagecoach came in from the east on a Thursday, just as the sun was tipping past its highest point and beginning its slow, punishing descent toward the red clay horizon. Dust followed the coach like a grudge, thick and amber and choking, settling over the storefronts of Hallow Creek, Texas, the way it always did, covering everything in a fine, gritty film that tasted of dry earth and old heat. Nobody paid the coach much mind at first. Coaches came and went. That was the nature of a frontier town still deciding whether it wanted to grow up or blow away. The blacksmith kept hammering. The women at the general store kept talking. Old Pete Sully kept tilting back in his chair outside the saloon, his hat pulled low, his boots propped up like he owned the boardwalk. But then the coach door opened, and the town held its breath. She stepped down slowly, one gloved hand gripping the iron handle, her boot finding the step with the careful precision of someone who had been bracing herself for a long time. She wore a traveling dress the color of storm clouds, gray-blue wool, high-collared, buttoned to the throat despite the heat. A bonnet sat low over her face, its wide brim shadowing her features so completely that you would have had to crouch and peer upward just to catch a glimpse of her eyes.
Her name was Clara Wren. She had traveled 6 days by rail and 2 more by coach to reach this place, carrying one leather trunk and a folded letter she had already read so many times the creases had begun to tear. The letter had come from a man named Harlan Greer, a cattle rancher of moderate reputation who had agreed, through a correspondence service out of St. Louis, to take her as his wife. Or rather, he had agreed until 2 weeks ago, when a second letter arrived saying he had changed his mind. The letter hadn't explained why. It didn't need to. Clara had understood the silence behind the words well enough. She stood now at the edge of the street, her trunk deposited unceremoniously in the dust beside her, and she looked, from what little anyone could see of her face, like a woman working very hard to keep herself upright.
The stagecoach driver called down to her that this was as far as her ticket carried, and then he clicked at his horses and moved along. Just like that, she was alone. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. Hallow Creek was not a cruel town by nature, but it was a small one, and small towns run on information the way engines run on coal. When information is scarce, speculation fills the gap, and speculation is rarely kind.
Word had gotten around, the way word always did in a place where nothing stayed private for long, that Harlan Greer had sent for a mail-order bride and then sent her back before she'd even arrived. The reasons given varied depending on who was telling the story. Some said he'd received a better offer, some said the woman had lied in her letters about her circumstances, but the version that took hold the firmest, the one that passed between lips with the most satisfaction, was the simplest and the cruelest, that he had seen her photograph and changed his mind on the spot.
So when Clara Wren stepped off that coach with her face hidden and her shoulders drawn in, the town thought it already knew everything it needed to know about her. She made her way to the only boarding house in town, run by a widow named Mrs. Aldridge, who was not unkind, but who had the particular gift of making a person feel simultaneously welcomed and pitied. Clara paid for a week in advance with coins she counted from a small cloth purse, and she carried her own trunk up the narrow staircase without asking for help. In the room, which smelled of cedar and old curtains, she sat on the edge of the bed and finally let herself feel the full weight of where she was. She was 24 years old. She had come from a family in Missouri whose name had once meant something and now meant considerably less. Her father had died the previous winter, leaving behind debts that swallowed everything: the house, the furnishings, the small dignity they had managed to maintain. The correspondence service had been her sister's idea, offered gently over a kitchen table with the kind of practicality that grief sometimes produces. Clara had agreed because there hadn't been many other roads that didn't lead somewhere worse. And now she was here, in a town that didn't know her name but already thought it knew her story, sitting on a narrow bed in a room she'd paid for with the last of what she had, with nowhere to go and no one who was expecting her. She did not cry. She had decided, somewhere around the third day on the train, that she was done crying. But she kept the bonnet on when she went downstairs for supper, and she kept it on the next morning when she walked to the general store to ask if there was any work to be had. She kept it on in the street and at the well and anywhere the eyes of Hallow Creek might find her, because the bonnet was the only armor she had, and she was not yet ready to put it down. The townspeople noticed. Of course they did.
The woman at the dry goods counter told her neighbor that the rejected bride was strange and secretive. The neighbor told someone else that she'd heard the woman had a scar. Someone else said it was more than a scar, that there was something wrong with her, something that explained everything. By the end of the week, Clara Wren had become a kind of ghost story the town was telling itself, and she moved through it like she could hear every word.
She could. She had found small work, mending mostly, and some laundry taken in. Not enough to stay much longer, not enough to get anywhere else. The town seemed to shrink a little each day, its edges pressing in closer, its eyes following her down the street with that particular mixture of pity and satisfaction that people reserve for someone they've already decided is less than them. One afternoon, near the end of her first week, she was walking back from the well when two men outside the saloon said something to each other as she passed, something low and laughing, and though she didn't hear the exact words, she heard the tone well enough that her steps faltered for just a moment, just one step, before she caught herself and kept walking. She did not look up. She didn't see the man leaning against the post at the far end of the boardwalk who had watched the whole thing. His name was Eli Cole. He was tall in the understated way of men who don't think about it, broad through the shoulders and lean everywhere else, with hands that looked like they had been shaped specifically for hard work. He wore a plain cotton shirt, worn at the elbows, and a hat that had seen several years of serious weather. His face was angular, quiet, the kind of face that didn't give much away, but took a great deal in.
Most people in Hallow Creek knew Eli Cole the way you know a piece of furniture. He was simply there, had always been there. A rancher who came into town once a week for supplies and occasionally to settle a bill, who spoke in sentences of the fewest possible words and seemed to require nothing from anyone. People liked him vaguely the way people like reliability. He didn't cause trouble. He didn't ask for anything. He came, he went.
What most people in Hallow Creek did not know, because Eli Cole had never seen any reason to tell them, was that the ranch he ran 12 miles to the north was not the modest operation it appeared from a distance. The Cole land stretched across nearly 4,000 acres of prime cattle country, watered by 2 creeks and sheltered by a long ridge that broke the worst of the winter winds. His herd numbered in the hundreds. His operation turned a profit that would have made Harlan Greer's holdings look like a kitchen garden. Eli had inherited the land from his father and built the rest himself, quietly, over 12 years of early mornings and stubborn persistence. He had no need to announce it. He had no interest in the posturing that came with wealth in a frontier town, the loud talk and the big hats, and the way certain men walked into a room expecting it to rearrange itself around them. He preferred the company of horses and open sky to nearly anything a town had to offer, and he came to Hallow Creek only when necessity required it. He had not intended to notice Clara Wren, but he had been watching from that post for several minutes before those men outside the saloon made their remark, and he had seen something in the way she carried herself, the rigid, careful dignity of it, the deliberate stillness of her chin,
the way she held her whole body like a woman who was very tired and very determined not to show it. And something about that sight had lodged in him like a splinter. He watched her walk down the street and turn the corner toward the boarding house. Then he pushed off the post, adjusted his hat, and went to get his supplies. He came back the next day. He told himself it was because he'd forgotten salt, which was partially true, but he had also thought, more than once in the hours between, about the woman at the well and the men by the saloon, and the particular sound a laugh makes when it is meant to diminish someone. He saw her outside the boarding house, struggling with a basket of wet laundry and a wind that had come up fast from the south, whipping sheets and shirts across the yard. She chased them with the focused desperation of someone for whom those clothes represented someone else's payment, and therefore her own survival. A shirt caught in the fence. 2 pillowcases went into the dirt. Eli tied his horse to the post without thinking about it and crossed the yard in a few long strides. He picked up the pillowcases, shook the dust from them, and caught the shirt from the fence before it tore. He held them out to her. She had gone very still. From beneath the brim of her bonnet, he could see the line of her jaw and the edge of a cheekbone and the way her lips had pressed together in an expression that was trying to decide whether this was kindness or condescension. "Wind's getting worse," he said. "If you've got a line inside, might be worth moving 'em." She looked at the laundry in his hands for a moment. Then she took it, carefully, like someone accepting something they haven't quite decided they deserve. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was low and steady and had Missouri in it.
Clara noticed all of it. She was a woman who had learned to notice everything, because noticing was the only way to stay ahead of what the world intended to do to you. She noticed that he never looked at her bonnet with curiosity or pity. He looked at her face, or the portion of it he could see, like it was simply the face of a person he was talking to, no more remarkable or unremarkable than any other. She noticed that he never offered opinions about her situation or what she ought to do about it. He simply showed up, occasionally and practically, and made whatever small thing was difficult slightly less so. She did not know what to do with this.
She had been prepared for this town's cruelty. She had even, in some dark corner of herself, expected it. But she had no practice with this kind of quiet regard. It made her feel, unsettlingly, like crying, not from sadness, but from something else, something she didn't have a clean word for. On a Tuesday afternoon in her 3rd week, with her money nearly gone and her situation narrowing toward a choice she didn't want to make, she was sitting on the steps of the boarding house when Eli Cole rode up the street and stopped.
He dismounted. He stood there for a moment, holding his horse's reins, looking at her with that steady, unreadable expression of his. "I could use someone to help with the books," he said, "at the ranch. My handwriting's bad enough that I can't always read it myself." She looked at him. "Room and board included," he said. "Work's honest." There was a long pause. The wind moved through the street. A door banged somewhere. "Why?" she asked. He seemed to consider this seriously, which she appreciated. He didn't deflect or charm. He said, "Because you're capable and you're in a hard spot, and that's enough reason."
The land unrolled in every direction like a bolt of good cloth, green and gold and immense, cut through by the silver thread of a creek, populated by more cattle than she could count at a glance. The house itself was large and solid, built from pale limestone with a wide porch and real glass in the windows, surrounded by outbuildings that were clean and well-maintained. Horses moved in the near pasture with the easy grace of animals that are properly kept. She said nothing, but Eli, driving beside her, saw her expression from the corner of his eye and allowed himself, very briefly, almost invisibly, to be pleased by it.
The first weeks settled into a rhythm that felt, to Clara, like something she was learning to trust slowly and carefully, the way you learn to trust a bridge you're not sure will hold your weight. She worked at the books in the mornings, and there was real work there, not charity work, a backlog of ledgers and receipts that had clearly been managed by a man who understood cattle deeply and paperwork only in theory. She organized and recorded and calculated, and she was good at it, and she knew she was good at it, and for the first time in a long time, she felt the particular quiet satisfaction of competence.
The cook, an older Mexican woman named Rosaria, welcomed her with the directness of someone who had no patience for pretense, but considerable warmth for people who worked hard and didn't complain. The ranch hands were respectful, most of them, and the one who wasn't found himself on the receiving end of a look from Eli Cole that apparently communicated a great deal without any words at all.
And Eli himself. He was a man who moved through his own land with the ease of someone who had earned every acre of it through personal acquaintance. He was up before the light and working until the dark, and in between he spoke to his animals and his people with the same measured care. Not effusive, not cold, simply present and reliable. He did not intrude on her. He did not perform warmth or manufacture conversation. But he was there in the small moments, a cup of coffee set near her elbow in the morning, a lantern brought when he noticed she was still working as the light faded, a word that meant nothing much and somehow meant a great deal.
She stopped wearing the bonnet in the house after the first week. She stopped wearing it on the porch after the second. By the third week, she wore it only in town, which she visited less and less as the ranch filled up more and more of what she needed. One evening, 3 weeks in, she sat on the porch as the sun went down and put the ranch in long golden light, and she reached up and untied the bonnet and set it in her lap. She wasn't sure what had made her do it, the beauty of the evening, perhaps, or exhaustion, or the strange accumulating weight of feeling safe.
It was Rosaria, a week later, who precipitated the unraveling of the thing that changed everything. She had been going through an old trunk at Eli's request, organizing papers from his father's time, when she came across a folded newspaper, yellowed with age, from a Kansas City publication dated 12 years back. She almost set it aside. Then she saw the name in the headline, and then she read the article, quickly, her heart beginning to do something strange and fast, and then she sat down on the floor of that back room and read it again. Clara Wren, she knew, was not her real name.
Or rather, it was the name she had taken from her mother's side after everything fell apart. But before the deaths and the losses and the terrible winter, before her father's failure had pulled their world down around them like a tent in a storm, her name had been Clara Alderton. Her father had been Thomas Alderton, who had, in his better years, been one of the most respected horse breeders in the Missouri River Valley. And before him, her grandfather had been one of the men who had first mapped and claimed the land on which the northern portion of the Cole Ranch now sat, land that had passed through several hands in a complicated sale that Eli's father had finalized for a price that was, to put it plainly, not what the land had been worth.
Rosaria brought the newspaper to Eli that evening without comment. She simply set it on the table in front of him and went back to the kitchen. He read it the way he did most things, slowly, without visible reaction, taking everything in. Then he sat with it for a long time. He thought about the land. He thought about the sale his father had made, which she had always known, in the honest part of himself, had been more advantageous to the Coles than to the family on the other side. He thought about a woman who had come across the country to marry a stranger because everything she'd had was gone. He thought about a bonnet worn like armor. He thought about the quality of a person who carries that much loss with that much dignity.
He found her on the porch in the last of the evening light. She saw his face and the newspaper in his hand, and something in her went absolutely still. "I should have told you," she said. Her voice was quiet and even. "I wasn't hiding it to deceive you. I didn't know how, and I didn't know if it mattered, and I didn't want—" She stopped. "I didn't want you to see me differently." He sat down in the chair beside hers. He set the newspaper down. "My father paid your family less than fair for this land," he said. "I've known that a long time."
She looked at him. "I can't give back what's gone," he said. "But I can tell you that whatever you're owed for your work here, I intend to pay it honestly. And I can tell you—" He stopped. He was not a man to whom speeches came easily. He looked out at the darkening land and seemed to find his words somewhere in it. "I can tell you that I don't see you differently, except that I understand better now how you got here, and I think you're one of the steadiest people I have ever met." The stars were beginning to come out, one by one, the way they do in wide country where there's nothing to dim them. Clara Wren, Clara Alderton, looked at this man who had asked for nothing, assumed nothing, taken nothing, and had given her, in the space of a few weeks, more of what she had actually needed than anyone had managed to give her in years. She thought about the road that had brought her here, the losses, the letters, the stagecoach, the dust, the whispers, the bonnet, and she thought about how the wrong roads sometimes deposit you, tired and bewildered, exactly where you were supposed to arrive. "I'd like to stay," she said, "if the offer still stands." "Offer still stands," he said. They sat together in the settling dark, with the creek murmuring somewhere below the ridge, and the cattle moving quietly in the pasture, and the whole wide frontier sky spreading itself out above them like a promise of space and possibility. A sky that asked nothing of a person except that they be alive under it. Later, when Rosaria asked if things had been settled, Eli said yes, briefly, the way he said most things. And Clara, passing through the kitchen with a small and private smile on her face, a face no longer hidden, a face that the evening light touched freely and the firelight touched warmly, said yes as well. The bonnet hung on a hook by the door. She never wore it again. Spring came slowly that year, the way good things tend to, not all at once, but in increments, in the lengthening of days and the softening of light, and the first green pushing up through the winter ground. The creek ran full and clear. The foals arrived, knobby-kneed and uncertain, and Clara was there to see the first one born, standing in the barn at 4 a.m. with straw in her hair and something bright and awake in her expression that Rosaria, watching from the doorway, thought looked a great deal like a person being restored to themselves. Word got back to Hollow Creek, eventually, the way things do. People adjusted their stories accordingly, the way people do, with varying degrees of grace. Harlan Greer heard what had become of the woman he'd rejected and felt something he couldn't quite name, which was probably good for him. But Hollow Creek felt very far away from the Cole Ranch in spring, and Clara found that she thought about it less and less, and about the land around her more and more, its rhythms and its beauties, and its long, particular silences that were not lonely, but companionable, like the silence of someone sitting beside you who has no need to fill the air with words. She learned the names of the horses. She learned which pasture flooded in a heavy rain and which held dry. She learned that Eli woke before anyone and could be found in the blue hour just before dawn, standing at the far fence watching the eastern sky with the expression of a man who finds the beginning of each day worth attending. She started meeting him there sometimes. They didn't talk much those mornings. They stood with their coffee and watched the light come, the way it came in that country, slow at first and then all at once,
flooding the land with warmth and color, turning the grass to gold and the creek to fire. And the world was so large and so indifferent and so beautiful that whatever small wound you carried into it tended to feel, if only for that moment, suitably proportionate.
She was 24 years old. She had traveled 6 days by rail and 2 more by coach, and arrived with 1 trunk and no prospects, and a face she'd hidden in shame because the world had told her she was something less than enough. But here, in the early light of a Texas spring, with red-winged blackbirds calling from the creek brush, and the cattle moving quiet as shadows through the morning mist, and a man beside her who had looked at her, really looked, and found her worth standing beside, she was starting, slowly and carefully, and with the particular courage of someone who has been hurt and is choosing to hope anyway, to believe that the world had been wrong. The light came up gold over the ridge. She did not look away.